Mr. White. Mr. White?
Yes.
You understood what I've just said to you?
Yes. Lung cancer. Inoperable.
I'm sorry. I just need to make sure you fully understand.
Best case scenario with chemo, I'll live maybe another couple of years. It's just, you've got mustard on your... Right there, you got mustard there. Right there?
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bricked Pit. If you're listening to this episode, you might want to go get yourself checked. Joining me is my co-host, Patient Zero for Pac-Man Fever, Adam.
Mm-hmm. And when he says get yourself checked, he doesn't just mean mentally. He means physically as well. Like, get that doctor to get really up in there and get a piece.
I think you're supposed to supply a list of listeners that have also listened to the podcast with you.
You are in fact patient zero.
If you've listened to any other podcast, you may have infected them.
And that other voice you heard was Josh, the head researcher for the Center for Enterolitis.
Nobody knows what enterolitis is or what enterolitis does, but enterolitis kills.
I'm so glad you followed through with that setup.
Look, tomorrow is National Talk Backwards for Enterolitis Awareness Day, so y'all wear condoms in your ears because I think that's real funny.
Is it kind of like Ash Wednesday? It's suddenly you learn something new about people at work. You listen to that podcast too.
Adam, I think we moved on from that joke.
He hasn't.
That's offensive. You crossed a line.
No, I just think we had moved on from that joke. It's like this joke appears closer than it.
The sad thing, Josh, is we've moved on from that joke.
There is no moving on in the brick pit. It's a pit. We're here forever.
So today's episode, we want to talk about illness. Oh, you sick little buggers out there.
Come on, get down with the sickness.
Oh man, now I'm physically ill with that reference. It's a common trope in films to use someone's infirmment for quick sympathy, but there's also films that delve into the social aspects of certain illnesses and how they affect people's lives, not just the person who's infirmed, but the people around them, and they attempt to create awareness of issues to evoke empathy and sympathy for the people who suffer from them, or just to make a quick buck off of it.
Well, it's interesting because I wonder if, there's the whole WebMD phenomenon of like people looking up symptoms and, WebMD is like you're dying. And so there's like a lot of health anxiety with that. Yeah. That if like you watch a film, you're like, oh my God, I might have that. Because it's like if someone coughs in a movie, they have cancer. They're dead. No one just coughs in a movie.
Or just has a headache.
Right. It's a narrative shortcut to be like, this person has a secret illness. So it doesn't catch you in the end. But, you're watching it and then like you go home and cough. It's like coughing now in public post-COVID.
Yeah.
And like you feel like shame for just coughing. You're like, I don't have COVID. I don't just had something caught in my throat.
It's just allergies, says the man bitten by the zombie.
Speaking of that, I actually have coworkers. They're twins, and they have this rare disease, and it's rare just period, especially for the fact that they're twins and they both have it, but it's a congenital disease that causes them to start coughing uncontrollably, to the point that they could actually pass out from doing it. So
holy crap.
And that stuff hit them like right as COVID was hitting. And so they just like, no, This is something else completely different. Please back away.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, illness is a real thing. It's something that people worry about, and it's intrinsically dramatic.
When I used to
Either-
teach school, kids would cough to get out of class. I used to say they had a case of the bullshits.
So
Adam going blue again.
Sorry, the bull craps. Yeah, I don't like it when you go blue.
I'm so disappointed in you, Adam.
Yeah, I know. You're using that potty mouth.
aside from the going blue, he's just
Oh no,
disappointed
that's
in
okay
general.
for me.
Jason goes blue so often, he's a Smurf.
It goes blue like Arrested Development blue.
Wow, this is de-evolved. Not in the context of the jokes, just in the quality.
No, you're just coming to realize.
The problem is you sobered up too quick, Jason. That's
Hold on, I can fix that right now. Let me just reach down here.
yeah.
It's something that I think a lot of filmmakers use as shorthand to get the audience to sympathize with characters who sometimes may not even be sympathetic other than the fact that they have an illness.
Yeah, and sometimes it helps, like that's used as a device to allow people serious introspection into their lives, so they can change otherwise for the better.
It's also a shortcut sometimes to let you know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
Yeah.
Right. Who's the bullies and who are the people that like, and it can be something subtle, right? I mean, it doesn't always have to be a whole thing. Like the asthmatic character who is on the playground and takes a puff of the inhaler and then somebody makes fun of them for it as a like prelude to it quickly establishes in a trope sense of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in a very simple way. Right.
And I think also a lot of the films that use the illness are a lot of times not about the person with the illness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about someone else's heroic journey to help that person.
That's actually an interesting take. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like the white savior trope, and
Yeah, it's the illness savior,
The able-bodied versus the disabled
exactly.
person. Yeah.
Did you see how I helped that person? Aren't I so brave?
That's basically what our
Exactly.
podcast is. It's just a embodiment of able-bodied personification. We're showing the world what it's like to be perfect, really. That's what they could aspire but never achieve what we do.
And that's
here.
another illness we need to talk about, mental illness. Delusions.
Which is a big part of movies. Like, I mean,
yes.
so as I often do, much to your chagrin, is when we come up with a topic, I immediately go search the internet for listicles of movies that fit that topic. The IMDb has a really great list of illnesses in movies. Out of the top 100, I just did a quick, like, back of the envelope count. Like, out of the top 100, like 77 of them are something to do with mental illness.
Yeah.
So, it's a big one.
I think there's an issue in Hollywood, especially of also like connecting mental illness to like, genius.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
creativity.
The
Yeah.
fine line between crazy and beautiful, right? That's the...
Yeah. It's like, oh, these people, they don't have mental illness, right? They're thinking on a level that's beyond what you're like, no, they're also mentally ill. Like they need
Right.
help. They need medication. They need, therapy and understanding. There are so many instances in Hollywood of these tropes, and even in literature, stuff like The Secret Garden, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, just any fan of the Insane Clown Posse.
Woo woo.
Girl Interrupted.
We're just going to keep naming movies until we actually start getting hate mail. Then we'll at least know that someone's listening and sending us mail.
Star Wars.
This podcast is now a listicle. we've been taken over by BuzzFeed.
This episode is a list of movies. Full stop.
After these 17 ads, we'll name 3 movies, and we'll have 17 more ads and a virus on your computer.
And we'll always recap the previous movies that we mentioned before we talk about the new movies.
This movie list about movies is very movie about. You're like, that doesn't even make grammatical sense.
Just scroll down to the comments, and somebody will list out the movies.
There you go. Not all heroes wear capes, right?
I just want to just ask, both of you kind of get your opinion on it. When do you think these types of movies really work, and when do you think they just kind of fall flat?
That's a good question, because a lot of these movies, I think intent, it always comes down to intent, obviously,
Yeah.
but like there is a lot of self-congratulation. Like when you start thinking of that, I thought immediately of a film I really hate, which is Patch Adams. Which, it's like, oh, I made those sick kids in the hospital laugh.
Wait, let's clarify something here. Do you hate Patch Adams or do you hate Robin Williams?
Both. I hate the actual Patch Adams. I don't think the real Patch Adams liked the movie Patch Adams.
No, he did not.
Just like the real Good Morning Vietnam guy did.
Yeah.
Basically, if Robin Williams has played you in a movie, you hate Robin Williams.
Is that why you hate him? Because he played you in Aladdin, and that's why you're all bitter about it?
He played me in our photo.
Thought it was Toys.
Actually,
oh God!
Actually, he played him at Mork and Mindy, and that's where it really started.
So anyway, yeah, like that. I think those kind of films are
exploitative. They feel that way.
Yeah.
Or they aggrandize a disability in a way that is both factually incorrect and sort of insulting to the people who are afflicted with the illness or disease.
Yeah, just as we're talking about, I'm thinking about like there's a scene in Magnolia where Julianne Moore goes to get medication for her husband. So she goes to the pharmacy to pick up, and she's a younger woman married to this older producer, and he's dying of cancer. She kind of has a breakdown at the pharmacy, and it's especially like having had to care for in some capacity for people that are on their way out. Like, it's very cathartic and very real. And I think like that, it's not aggrandizing, and it's really like kind of like, in real life, it is a difficult thing to be that person, but like there's not a lot of heroism involved in it. There's a lot of just making it through, and you rarely see that in film. So in Magnolia, it really sticks out.
When it's done well, where illness is a part of the arc of the protagonist of the story, but it's not exploited in a way that makes you feel, I don't know. There are certain, like you mentioned, there are certain disability movies where they get it so egregiously wrong, even as a layperson, that that's not how the illness actually presents. That's where I think they do a disservice. But both the people, I think those are the worst. I think that's the absolute worst, is where not only do you bring attention to some unusual disorder, you do it badly so that the people who are actually living with this not only have to deal with whatever they're dealing with, but now they have to deal with this mischaracterization of their illness that's in popular culture. A classic example of this, I think, over time, over many media, it has been autism. Or what was Asperger's syndrome in the previous. A lot of autistic people, for example, like Josh, hate Big Bang Theory because of the depiction of Sheldon as an autistic person, but he's done as the butt of a lot of the jokes, and he's mischaracterized as all of the tropey parts of autism without really showing the full cost of that and what it means to embody that as an individual. I think we talk about autism on the show, or one of us will in one of our picks tonight, but that could be problematic. I think that's the worst use of a disability or an illness.
I will say that at least most films, I think, pay lip service, even if they abandon it while filming, but they do the research. I think that there are actually groups that's their job, like on shows like House and stuff like that.
Well, that's different because they take the science seriously, right?
Well, right. Like, I think most films and stuff have some hook me up with a doctor that understands this, know.
Yeah, a consultant of some kind that can explain.
Yeah, right. And whether or not they listen to them, or because it's...
The good analogy for this is like war movies where they've got the soldier consultant on the film who gets the battle stuff right, but then the producers in their infinite wisdom get the uniforms completely wrong, right? And so you're sitting in the theater with a guy in the army, and he's like, that's not the uniform. That's not even the right set of uniform for this time period or whatever. Like, those little details matter to the people who lived it, right? Like, to the average Joe, okay, well, this all looks mostly true.
And I think we'll find this represented a lot of times is that they decide to disregard stuff because it's more dramatic
but a different way.
to show it, some way
Yeah,
else.
that's a really good point. They take what they would call creative liberties, right?
Yeah. The worst thing they do is when they propagate the false stereotypes and make something seem trivial when it isn't. As to your point about the Big Bang Theory and Sheldon and the depiction of autism, which, I think most people that don't like the Big Bang Theory just don't like it because it's terrible. But the falsely depicting of autism.
The depiction of autism is pretty far down my list of reasons I don't like that show. I didn't even know he was autistic.
Yeah, I think a movie and even good movies will, of course, have their own dramatic license. But I do think the good ones are the ones that honestly try to, if not tell the story 100% correctly, but do it in a way that is at least truthful to the experience of the people involved.
And the example of like one of the ones I'm going to talk about tonight, they take, especially if it's a poorly understood disability, they actually take that extra step to educate the audience on what it means to have this, to suffer with it, which could be transformative for both society. I mean, as an individual viewer, but if the movie is well done enough and popular enough, it can actually be transformative for society's understanding of these disabilities. So,
right, and I think that there are probably some real world cases where films have helped lead to a broader understanding of disabilities, or again, it's a double-edged sword because, like, for every great example we can find, I'm sure we can find some that set people back. So it's dangerous territory.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that has probably been misused the most is not just in the mental health realm, but like schizophrenia, especially.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a lot of misunderstanding of what schizophrenia really is based on how it's been portrayed in cinema and TV and even some literature for the past, 60 or 70 years.
Do you think there's any film out there that portrays it more accurately? Maybe we should have had a psychiatrist or something, or a doctor on the show. We know
a couple, don't we call them up? Helpline.
They don't want to be on the show.
I can lose my license for this.
That's what I was about to say. I don't want to lose my medical license.
Let's call Loveline and just record it like
Dr. Drew.
Theoretically, Dr. Drew, what do you think?
If you were on a crappy podcast about films.
He said, I host with Adam Carolla. I know all about crappy podcasts. His millions of listeners are laughing.
He's wiping his eyes with $100 bills right now. He's so insulted by her.
All right. So why don't you start us off, Adam, with one of your choices?
I would love to. So the first movie that came to mind whenever we pitched this idea, which I think is a really good sort of archetype for this, is the movie Philadelphia.
Highline Incorporated is now represented by Wyant, Wheeler, Hellerman, Tetlow, and Brown. And more specifically, Andrew Beckett.
Yes! Bravo!
I sincerely appreciate your faith in my abilities.
Mr. Beckett! How are you? What happened to your face?
I have AIDS.
Oh.
I'm seeking representation.
You want to sue Wyant, Wheeler, Hellerman, Tetlow, and Brown?
I was diagnosed with AIDS 8 months ago during a bout with pneumonia.
What's that in your forehead, pal?
Andy, everyone in this room is your friend.
I misplaced an important complaint. That's their story.
We've been talking it over, your future, that is, and we feel that because we respect you so much, we must be honest with you.
Excuse me. Am I being fired?
Would you accept a client if you were constantly thinking, I don't want this person to touch me?
I have a case.
I don't want them to even breathe on me.
If you don't want it for personal reasons.
Thank you, that's correct, I don't.
That's very disappointing.
Sir, wouldn't you be more comfortable in a research room?
No. Would it make you more comfortable?
Beckett, how you doing?
Counselor.
Did you find a lawyer?
There's going to be things said at the trial that are going to be hard for you to hear.
I want to know everything about his personal life. What deviant groups did he secretly belong to?
I didn't raise my kids to sit in the back of the bus.
Is Andrew Beckett the kind of lawyer who misplaces crucial documents?
An excellent lawyer.
Andrew Beckett is dying.
You were impressed with Andrew Beckett's work.
Andrew Beckett is angry.
What powerful force has caused him to change his mind?
And he wants someone to pay.
TriStar Pictures presents
The law's been broken.
I just want what is fair, what is right.
You remember the law, don't you?
a Jonathan Demme picture.
So let's talk about what this case is really all about.
Did you fire Andrew Beckett because he had AIDS?
The general public's hatred, our loathing, our fear.
In this courtroom, Mr. Miller, justice is blind to matters of sexual orientation.
We don't live in this courtroom, no, do we?
Tom Hanks,
I love the law.
Denzel Washington,
Are you gay?
Objection!
in a story about our lives,
Oh, Mom, today's a good day.
our fears,
Andy brought AIDS into our offices.
and our humanity.
I hate this case.
Philadelphia.
How many lawyers you go to before you call me?
9.
Philadelphia is the 1993 Tom Hanks movie. He actually won the Academy Award for this. Widely considered a seminal film in American and sort of our American filmography. It's the story of a white shoe law firm attorney based out of the namesake town of Philadelphia, had been courted by one of these massive AmLaw 100 law firms to be one of their star attorneys. He was a senior associate, had recently been given a promotion and put on the largest case in the firm's sort of roster at the time, this big corporate law case. At the promotion, another of the senior partners noticed one of the Kaposi's sarcoma wounds on Tom Hanks' face. Andrew Beckett's the name of the attorney and the character he plays. So notices one of these wounds that are emblematic of AIDS on his face. And this, of course, is meant to take place in the late 80s, early 90s. Film is from 1993. For those of you who aren't that old, if you remember back in the early 90s and late 80s, there was still a lot of stigmatization of HIV/AIDS. It was
A gay disease.
Yeah, it was called gay cancer for all the way up into the early 90s even. And the character, Andrew Beckett, he's gay, and he hides that as well from the partners, because even that fact alone would have been enough to get him into hot water. But the short and long of it is they fire him.
They fire him?
Yeah, they fire him. They fire him because he lost his file on a big case, another ancillary case that needed to be done on a certain day at a certain time. And miraculously, just before the deadline, another attorney shows up saying he found the file misplaced, and they blame Andrew for it and basically say he's incompetent. And they use that as an excuse to get rid of him. But what is clear from the context of the firing is actually because they know he has AIDS.
I may have watched the wrong movie preparing for this. I watched Philadelphia Story, and I was quite confused because like Jimmy Stewart's is a little drunk, but he's not really infirmed or ill.
That's a good movie too. So Andrew Beckett goes to a dozen or so attorneys trying to get somebody to take his wrongful termination case, which are difficult to take anyway. They're hard to prove. As most people know, employment at will, et cetera, you got to prove some kind of discriminatory action against you in order to successfully sue for a wrongful termination. So he ultimately goes to the billboard lawyer, the guy on TV, as everybody who sees him on the street, hey, you're the guy on TV. He's kind of the ambulance chaser of Philadelphia, who's played by Denzel Washington. As I rewatch this, I just want a quick aside. My wife and I watched this together. Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington are, without a doubt, two of the most incredible actors of our generation. I mean, they're just phenomenal. And seeing them on screen together, they were both comparatively young. I mean, this was a long time ago now. They were comparatively young back in 1993 when this was filmed. Just phenomenal. Just so well acted, so well done. Denzel Washington takes the case, but he's very, very reluctant to do so. And in fact, he doesn't initially take it. He rejects it outright. And he sees Tom Hanks in the law library researching, and the librarian comes up, and Tom Hanks is kind of clearly visibly ill. He has these emblematic wounds on his face that were at the time sort of the symbol of AIDS and kind of became the thing you could tell people had AIDS with. And the librarian comes over and says, Tom Hanks, wouldn't you be more comfortable in a room by yourself studying? And Tom Hanks says, no, would you be more comfortable if I was in a room by myself? And Denzel Washington had recently, because Tom Hanks had came into his office, and the movie does a really good job of sort of showing what I experienced in this time frame was the fear people had of getting AIDS because they did not understand how it was transmitted. They really didn't. And so Denzel Washington has a new baby at home, and Tom Hanks comes into his office to try to hire him for this wrongful termination suit. And what the camera does is it focuses on every object in Denzel Washington's office that Tom Hanks touches. The picture on his desk, the doorknob, the frame, the hat. And Denzel steps, as soon as he realizes why Tom Hanks is there, he steps back 2 paces. Then he immediately goes to like his family physician to like be checked out for AIDS. And the guy's like, I don't need to know your family business, but I'll do a blood test. And he's like, no, it's not like that at all, But the important part of that scene is there's some exposition there where the doctor it clearly lays out that there's only certain ways that you can contract HIV. The point of that, which is what I was kind of alluding to earlier, is that educates the audience, because I think of most people who saw this movie in 1993, they probably didn't know. They probably weren't fully aware of the science behind this.
Oh, no, yeah. At that time, people was like, oh, if you breathe the same air.
Yeah. Handshakes are terrifying, right?
Like any touch or anything like that.
Sit on the toilet seat after him. And
that was the whole thing. And that's the zeitgeist of the partner's argument for firing him, at least among themselves behind closed doors. He used the same bathroom as us. Can you believe he brought AIDS into our office?
Regarding Andy, I want to know everything about his personal life. Does he frequent those pathetic bars on Chestnut Street?
Oh, Jesus.
What other homosexual facilities does he go to?
Absolutely, Charles.
What deviant groups or organizations does he secretly belong to?
First thing in the morning.
Wait a minute, Bob.
Look.
What is it?
Let's make a fair settlement offer, put this whole tragic business behind us.
Bob, Andy brought AIDS into our offices, into our men's room. He brought AIDS to our annual family picnic.
We ought to be suing him, Bob. Where is your compassion, John?
Bob, we gave him Highline. Did Andrew Beckett say I might not be able to serve our client to the best of my ability? He said nothing. And now, discarding the trust and affection I conferred upon him, Andrew Beckett proposes to haul me into court, to sling accusations at me, to call me a bigot. Both of you, but the entire Philadelphia judicial establishment. My God.
So Denzel Washington, to take us back, he sees him in the law library and sees sort of the discrimination. And of course, the obvious parallel there is Denzel Washington, a mere 50 years earlier, because he's black, wouldn't even have been allowed in the law library himself because of his own discrimination, right? And so there's this recognition of what he's seeing is wrong on a fundamental level. It's just wrong. And so he sits down and asks Tom Hanks, what are you working on? And he says, I found this really interesting case. And it kind of hooks Denzel Washington in, and he agrees to take the case. The second act of the film is the trial, where they go to court. The law firm brings their entire team out. All the senior partners are there, and their young, whip of a litigator is there. And her job is to really humiliate Tom Hanks and to discredit
character assassination.
And, it starts out like, going over his sexual history. And have you ever visited this gay theater in Philadelphia? Remember you're under oath. And he's like, yeah. And weren't you with your current partner at the time? Yeah. And was the man you were with in that theater the same man? No. And all these kind of really just terrible things. And the thing the film does really well is a courtroom drama, which a lot of movies don't get right. They not only focus on the jury's reaction, they really do a good job of making the judge, because judges are humans too, they show his facial expressions at sort of his, this is distasteful, right? This is technically and legally correct that you're asking these questions, but this is distasteful. This is unpleasant for everyone involved. As it goes on, they reveal the way so they have to prove that the senior partner knew that Tom Hanks had AIDS. And the way they do that is they bring a paralegal who had worked at a different law firm with him to the stand. She had been very vocal about her diagnosis because at the firm she was working with in a previous city with the senior partner, she had contracted AIDS through a blood transfusion. The firm that's being sued leaned in on this. Well, you contracted it through no fault of your own. You did nothing wrong. And, like she's some saint, and she's like very pointedly looks at Tom Hanks and says to the effect of, it doesn't matter how we got it. I stand with him. And I think that what you're doing to him is terrible, right? She turns it around and says, what, you didn't fire me, but you shouldn't have fired him either, essentially. It's loosely based on, it's an amalgamation of several real life cases that happened all around the same time in the late 80s and early 90s of prominent attorneys in big city law firms like this. The facts are very, very similar enough. In fact, they're so similar that one of the families of the attorneys sued the producers of the movie because they had been promised credit and royalties as part of the filmmaking process. Producers argued that they changed the story enough that it wasn't similar enough. Is neither here nor there. I think they settled out of court and the families, but
don't ever try and screw over the family of a lawyer.
Well, so tragically, the way the story ends is, of course, he wins his case, but he dies. He dies of AIDS essentially immediately thereafter.
Which that's actually, a real world scenario.
That's what happened.
Generally, what happens.
Yeah,
yeah. It AIDS or cancer or anything like that. Anybody that sick generally does not see
the fruits of the justice.
Yeah.
It's a Pyrrhic victory, I believe is what they call that.
I was a little too young to really get. I wouldn't have seen this movie when it came out, but in hindsight, kind of reconstructing what the feelings at the time were, they fell along the lines you would expect. There was a lot of controversy because just talking about AIDS was, because like Jason mentioned earlier, it was considered a gay disease, and the social criticism of that at the time was much different than it is today.
And also at that time, gay characters were usually like the sidekicks or, the butt of jokes.
Yeah, or the butt of joke. Within the gay community, this was one of the first movies to present gay people in not necessarily just a positive light, but just like they're just normal people. Like these are just people who are living their life.
Non-stereotypical. Like he wasn't a hairdresser.
Right.
He wasn't,
a high-powered attorney. And,
right.
That they would have never
suspected
was gay until he developed AIDS.
It's a really powerful movie. I think this is a great example of movies that did it. I'm not of either of the affected communities here, of the stereotypes or the stigmatization. I'm way too old for this, but as to the best of my knowledge, this did a lot, and according to the critics and reception, it did a lot to destigmatize the disease, and it really made a big difference and an impact on the way people with AIDS were treated, because it basically taught people that discrimination is wrong.
It was for a very long time, and it still exists, but I think that some strides have been made because, just insinuating someone was homosexual it would sometimes be the butt of jokes in film and stuff, but it had real world consequences. I mean, it wasn't till Clinton came around that there was the don't ask, don't tell policy in the military, but you could be brought up on charges. And so the don't ask, don't tell just it's kind of like the federal government's doing with marijuana now. They're like, well, it's still illegal, but we're not going to prosecute it.
Right.
That's the world that it was. And you're right. Having someone like Tom Hanks play the lead role.
And win the Academy Award for it and act it so respectfully and so well. Mm-hmm. And Denzel was also like top of his game in this period.
One of the many roles he should have earned an Oscar before Training Day.
Yeah. That's a different story for a different day, but yeah.
The saddest thing about the story is that Andrew Beckett never learned if his brother, Dr. Samuel Beckett, made the leap home.
I give that joke 2 out of 10 stars.
Those are pity stars, too.
Those are pity stars.
Man. Quantum Leap joke's always funny. Ziggy says there's a 45% chance this joke goes over really well.
So I want to quote something here. So Roger Ebert, who is obviously I've talked about a lot, in a contemporary review of the movie, he said, it is quite a good film on its own terms. And for moviegoers with antipathy toward AIDS, but an enthusiasm for stars like Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, it may help broaden the understanding of the disease. It's a groundbreaker like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the first major film about interracial romance. It uses the chemistry of popular stars and a reliable genre to sidestep what looks like controversy. And I think that's incredible. And I think that was astute of him to point out at the time. It's an interesting, it didn't
It's great for him to say, but I prefer it when he tears the movie apart.
Yeah, that's true. The last point I'll make is that this movie culturally had more impact than I think even it expected to, I guess is the way I would say that. Like,
yeah, it really did mainstream the
conversations about this.
Yeah. I mean, it did better than any benefit concerts or anything like that, was the most thing that, the artist community could do at the time, for anything that came around. It informed people about the realities. It brought the conversation into people's living rooms and offices that allowed other people to come along and talk about it even more after.
And I think it really proved a template for how, I hate to say infotainment, but that you could tell a compelling story that also brought to light issue. And it's something that is nowadays, it's very common to have this level of, I don't even want to say subtext, but for there to be films and TV shows that deal with, I guess, outsider issues and tries to be as respectful as they can. I mean, like things like outside of illness, like Reservation Dogs and stuff like that.
That's a great culturally sensitive. Yeah.
Right. But that, whereas that's the norm now, in 1993, it was not. It is. I would say it is 100% because I know many people who work in the industry and that's their job.
Yeah.
That is their job. And in 1993, these jobs did not exist.
And I will say there were a lot of movies that came afterwards. Not that they didn't exist before, but I think you see more of a mainstreaming of these types of films, and not just of the illnesses and stuff. But you have like Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which was like an Oscar contender and actually won some awards.
And also a hilarious film.
Yes. It kind of opened the door for more, as you said, like outsider culture to be brought forth. And, not that it wasn't before, John Waters was, of course, one of the big pioneers in this area.
But John Waters wasn't going to have Wesley Snipes and Patrick Swayze in his films. Whereas Tu Wong Fu was a star vehicle.
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of a loose remake of Priscilla, the American audiences. But Priscilla had Hugo Weaving and Terrence Stamp. Hugo Weaving was kind of unknown then, but Terrence Stamp
Terrence Stamp, yes. Like it was like Zod in drag. The Limey.
I know we're kind of getting off, but man, there's some really powerful performances in that film. It's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Adam.
So, Josh, why don't you tell us about the movies you watched?
Okay, I'll tell you about a film that came out in 1988 when I was 11. It was very impactful to me. It's maybe one of the films that made me want to become a podcaster about films.
I knew back then.
I talked to everyone I knew about this movie, and no one gave a crap, just like now. So
some things never change.
Time is a flat circle, my friends.
In the biopic about you, this is the scene we'll open on, is you being 11 years old.
Yeah,
you gotta see this movie.
I'm watching the Barry Levinson classic Rain Man.
Of course, I'm an excellent driver. He lets me drive slow on the driveway. There's only 28 miles on the odometer since I drove it a week ago last Saturday. It should be more than 28 miles.
What is this? Who is this guy?
Raymond is your brother.
My brother? I don't have a brother.
Of course, I'm an excellent driver.
You know how to drive?
Yeah.
You never, ever touch the steering wheel when I'm driving. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Of course, I don't have my underwear.
What?
You're using Raymond. You're using me. You use everybody.
I'm using Raymond. Raymond!
Raymond, am I using you, Raymond?
Yeah.
Shut up! He is answering a question from a half hour ago!
Quite a trip, huh?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. What happened this past week?
Dance with Charlie Babbitt.
You want to learn how to dance?
Yeah.
Dance with your brother?
I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel a little silly.
What else did you do?
Kiss Susanna.
Do you enjoy kissing a woman?
I don't know.
How was that?
Wet.
Wet?
Yeah.
Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise, in a Barry Levinson film.
I like having you for my brother.
I'm an excellent driver.
I hear the word of the Lord.
Rain Man stars Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise plays Tom Cruise. He's
80s Tom Cruise.
He's basically his character from Risky Business grown up.
Yep.
And Dustin Hoffman plays
Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah. He's loosely based on a real person that they kind of consulted, but I don't think he had the mental capacity, but like his family and stuff was involved.
Have you ever seen the documentary of that guy?
Yeah. It's
Just
pretty
as a side
wild.
note.
He had severe autism.
Yeah.
And
which they didn't really call that at the time.
No, but this is also probably the first time 90% of the people that watched the film had ever heard the word or
And this
knew
is an
it was a
example,
thing.
I think, where it went the opposite way, where it became in vogue to insult people who were different by calling them Rain Man. You know what I mean? Like,
I think there's probably some of that, but I think that's also just kind of the cultural zeitgeist because there is a lot of like funny stuff.
Yeah,
here,
fair.
but there's also a lot of pathos. I think it's a good film.
The movie's a good film, but Adam is 100% correct on that. That yes, calling people Rain Man was an insult. It was a put down.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't, but I'm not saying that's because of the movie.
No. I'm not saying it's the movie's fault.
It's because of the cultural footprint.
Because people suck. They didn't take away the lesson. They didn't take away the Philadelphia lesson where they're like, "Oh, AIDS is a really bad thing we should care about."
We've talked about in real life before the fact that in the morning I watched the Challenger shuttle explode on TV,
and there were jokes
that
already
afternoon.
that afternoon.
At recess in the playground, there were already very bad tasting jokes, and we were in second grade.
Yeah. And, that was just the zeitgeist of the time. So Rain Man,
the 80s was mean, people. In case you didn't know.
It really was.
Yeah. You know what it is people didn't have the internet to channel their like bitterness and hate to like anonymous people.
Well, no, there was just like the normies were fine, but if you were in any kind of like
outsider,
if you were on any side street, your life was not super.
That's what
fun.
I'm saying. Like there was nowhere the jerks. See, nowadays, not that people were nice in real life now, but I think it was worse in like the 80s and 90s. Because the internet didn't give the jerks an outlet that they could go bully strangers. They had to like get that energy out. So they go find their weird neighbor who likes D&D and they go punch them in the neck for no reason at all. Like that was like, I got to get it out one way or the other,
Hey, Rain Man, can I get back to
that? Sorry. I got a little autobiographical there for a second. Sorry.
Tom Cruise plays like shyster, like exotic car importer, and things are going sideways because he can't get the cars past the Lambos through customs. The first time I ever heard the song Ico, by the way, which is sad because like
considering you grew up on the coast, just spitting distance from New Orleans, yes,
right. It is my secret shame that this is where. And so his dad dies. He was estranged from his dad. Finds out the inheritance has gone to his brother that he does not remember. And he remembers having a imaginary friend they called the Rain Man. And it's because his brother's name was Raymond. And he was, as a kid, he mispronounced it.
Funny Rain Man.
Rain Man?
Yeah.
I said Rain Man?
Yeah, funny Rain Man.
Was I trying to say Raymond and it came out Rain Man?
Yeah, funny Rain Man.
You're the Rain Man? Who took this picture?
TAD.
And you lived with this?
Yeah, 10961 Beechcrest Street, Cincinnati, Ohio.
When did you leave?
January 21st, 1965.
You remember
It's
that?
Thursday, very snowy out. 7.2 inches of snow that day.
Yes, that's just after Mom died, New Year's.
Yeah, Mom died January 5th, 1965.
And you remember that day? You remember that day that you left?
Short and sudden illness.
You remember that day that you left? Yeah. Was I there? Where was I?
You were in the window. You waved to me. Bye-bye, Rain Man. Bye-bye, Rain Man.
So you were the one that sang to me?
Yeah.
What did you sing? What was that song?
The kid was taken away and institutionalized when he was very young, and so he decides
because that's what they did to different people back then too.
Well, and it's clear that, and I think the real person as well is severe enough that they cannot live on their own.
Which, just as a real quick aside, not to discredit what Jason just said, but the tone Jason said was that was what you did. While it was bad and the treatment was poor, it was often better than what you could give at home. But through insurance no longer covering it and the federal government stopping paying for it, they closed all those institutions, and all those people ended up on the street and in jail instead, which I think is a much poorer version of the same thing. That's my social commentary for the night.
I don't want to get into that because a lot of those places were horrible.
They were horrible.
Watch Titty Cut Follies, and you will not think that government-run mental institutions were great.
I don't think they're great, but I don't think jail's better. That's all I'm saying. So that's
anyway,
my 10 cents.
Can I talk about flipping Rain Man?
I
don't even want to talk about it anymore.
All right, next movie.
So he goes and he gets the brother and sneaks him out because they don't want him to take the brother, and they go on a road trip because he wants to get the inheritance. And through this road trip, he kind of starts to understand, like, he has very OCD symptoms. Like, if he doesn't watch Judge Wapner at the allotted time, he freaks out. He's kind of very mathematically very smart. And they go to Vegas and count cards and stuff.
What they used to call idiot savant.
Yeah, that's the correct term at the time. So, and then eventually, like, he comes to, like, care for his brother and stuff, and says, I'm going to take care of him. And what I think the film does well is that Tom Cruise was ill-equipped to care for his older brother that was severely disabled. So eventually he comes to the conclusion that he still wants him in his life, but he does need to be in this institution because he can't take care of him. I think Dustin Hoffman won an Oscar for this. I'm not sure, but it was really well received. I saw it in the movie theater twice, which is a big deal when you're 11 to convince your parents to take you to see Rain Man twice.
Yeah, I'm sure they were like, yeah, that tracks. May I ask you a quick question?
Somebody like me is on the screen. This Tom Cruise guy.
Well, you're about the same height at that time.
And I got a gap in the center of my face on my teeth.
Well, there's this great scene, as you were talking about, when Tom Cruise realized that Dustin Hoffman's Raymond is Rain Man. Raymond recounts an episode where he turned on the bathwater and it was too hot and it scalded the baby, and he was the one to put the baby in. That baby was, of course, Tom Cruise's younger character. And that's the reason why he was sent to an institution. Immediately, Tom Cruise's entire concept of this man's life changes because he realizes that, in a way, he's responsible for his brother. Right. Yeah. For being, even though he was just he had no actual agency in what happened.
Right.
But it's because of that. That's why his brother spent most of his life institutionalized, and he never saw him again after that. He didn't even know he had a brother. It wasn't until he met him, because he finds out that all of his father's money is going to some unknown person in this institution, and all he's getting is his father's car. When he goes and investigates that, he finds out he has a brother for the first time in, like 30 years. It's one of those situations where it's like, oh, that's right. Tom Cruise can act.
Exactly. Like,
we don't always remember that.
Yeah.
This is the reason why he's still making movies and bringing people to the theater. It's because he can
He delivers the goods.
Right. It's not a wide bandwidth. I mean, it's like he's got a narrow lane, but in that lane, he's really hard to touch. And then you pair him up with Dustin Hoffman, who also is just a magnificent actor. Like I said, it has some very funny stuff to it, but it's also like there's a lot of, and that's what I like about it, is that it goes from lighthearted to like heavy pathos, and things just turn south in the tone switches in a natural way. Like, the wheels fall off very realistically. It goes from like, this is a movie and everything's going great. And it's like, but no, in real life, this would fall apart almost immediately.
It's not magical. It's hard.
Yeah.
This is a difficult thing to be with.
It's almost kind of like a Shakespeare play. Shakespeare knew when to bring in like the comic relief to lighten things up. And this movie does that very well. It has Tom Cruise's anger at the beginning, his anger at Raymond on how he acts and how difficult he is because he doesn't fit into Tom Cruise's life.
Right.
And he's a pain, he's a burden. And then how that different, the moments together become lighthearted in instances, and they share things together. Like he gets, Raymond that whole new wardrobe in Vegas.
And it's like there's so many scenes in this film that have just been seeped into the cultural fabric because it's that good. But like there's a lot of kind of subtext about the dad, because like Tom Cruise did not have a good relationship with his dad, and they were at odds a lot. And then it's revealed, it's like maybe his dad blamed him for having to send Raymond away, and like maybe that's why he was so hard on him. There's a depth to the screenplay where there's lots of moving parts behind the scenes, and then you pair it with like two titans of acting that are just like at the top of their game.
Yeah, they're at the peak at that point.
Yeah.
Like Tom Cruise he's not at his peak then, but he's definitely climbing up. Like he's become noticed, Top Gun and all that. Like he is being recognized as a movie star. And quite frankly, it's probably the last actual movie star that we have.
I agree wholeheartedly. He's literally the last movie star. He's the last action hero, as it turns out.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot as we approach this subject is, you mentioned earlier there is a parallel a bit where production companies spend a lot of effort to make things seem authentic. They have advisors, they have whatever, especially when things like Native American representation. That's a pretty concrete example. And the reason I mentioned that specifically is I wonder if either of you have an opinion on what obligation movie makers have to have disabled actors represent disabled characters with the same disability, specifically with like deafness and blindness and things like that. I think there's a turning point happening right now about that specific thing where if it's feasible and it's possible, so, someone who's profoundly autistic, like, Dustin Hoffman's character, that may or may not be plausible, right? But for a whole host of things that are represented on screen, like wheelchair-bound people, by way of a quick example, there's not a really good, compelling reason why you can't cast actors who share those traits to portray those, especially if it's sort of similar to the plot. Do either of you have any thoughts on that, or is it just me that's...
I think you're seeing, though, that people with disabilities are being cast a lot more, and not just for characters who are written as disabled
also true.
Originally.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I do think, yes, opening up that representation a lot more is the better thing to do. I mean, it would be the equivalent of, we're going to do a movie about Frederick Douglass, and we're going to hire Sam Rockwell to play Frederick Douglass. We're
going to hire Josh to do it.
Yeah. But at the same time, there are certain aspects of it that is like, actors can do things that, we have plenty of actors who've played astronauts who've never actually been into space. Like there's certain things you don't have to have. It's a fine line. It's a fine line
to do it. If you could cast an astronaut to be an astronaut.
Here's the issue I have with it. So back in the day, it was Marlee Matlin.
Yeah.
She was a deaf actress. She pretty much was the go-to. Yeah. But here's the thing.
She's an Oscar winner. She's a
terrific. Yeah. She is a phenomenal actress.
Mm-hmm.
She's a great actress, and she's deaf. I don't know That's not a large.
So,
it's not a
such
large
a good
pool to
actress that
pull
she's
from.
been in a lot of media where the character written was not originally deaf, but she auditioned for it and they rewrote the script.
Right, or they just
said this will work fine.
had the character as is, and she
Yeah.
was just deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like Jason said, you find there's only so many astronauts. Now you got to find one that's good at acting too. It's difficult. It's like I was watching the other day the Michael Mann film. That's got it's about the smoking stuff in Mississippi.
Oh, Inside? No, not Inside Man.
Insider, yeah.
The Insider, yeah.
So, I watched that film before I knew who Michael Mann really was, because it was about stuff that had happened in a state. I'd lived through it. Michael Moore was the attorney general that tried these cases against the tobacco companies. He is in the movie for about 2 minutes.
Which is 2 minutes too long.
He's terrible.
He's awful.
It's like Quentin Tarantino being on screen. You're like, oh no.
It totally rips you out of the movie.
Yeah.
It's totally there to appease his vanity.
Okay.
That becomes the central issues. You have to balance
ability to act versus representation. That's fair.
Let's be honest. The new Marvel show Echo got extremely lucky that they found a Native American actress who was also deaf.
Who is incredible. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Who can act.
Now here's my point to that, Jason. And I don't have a
don't come at me, Adam.
I don't have a horse in this, but I'm saying, did they get lucky? Did they actually make an earnest effort to find what was already there, which many other productions don't do?
With Echo in particular, they put out a casting call for deaf Native Americans, and
which is probably really hard to do, and they probably had to go through a lot of frankly bad actors. Right?
I don't know how many. I don't know how large the pool was, but it couldn't. She worked at an Amazon, she was like a sorter or whatever, like an Amazon place. Again, I think luck had a lot.
But
to
that's
do with it.
The point is that they tried hard,
but they
failed.
Yeah.
Which is
the effort,
which is what I'm trying to say. Like to your
they
point,
also
maybe there's diamonds
in
the rough, and they're just not willing to do that work. Is what I'm trying to say. Like,
sure, you're right. I'm right. Don't think for an instant that if you have some kind of illness or disability that you're not a good actor. You're not a good actor because there aren't many people that are good. Most of the actors we see in
are
movies
not good actors. Yeah, that's fair.
This podcast says anything. It's like how much people suck at their job.
It is often disheartening that we made like $11 last year, and that
it had nothing to do with this podcast.
And the worst,
we're the best podcast that money could buy.
And meanwhile, Adam Baldwin made like $280 million or something.
Adam Baldwin's not a Baldwin brother, right?
Is he not?
No.
Okay.
He just had the fortune of having
a good Baldwin name.
Yeah.
Who are the?
I don't think they'd have him either because I think he's like pretty right wing guy.
Who are all the Baldwin brothers? Now I've got to go.
Let's not get into that. No,
Sneezy, Shooty.
We're going to make our listeners sick listening to this over and over again.
This listicle is a list of Baldwin brothers,
not to be confused with the Estevezes.
Or the Bridges.
Or the Bridges.
Or the Hemsworths.
Or the Scars.
So what you're telling me, so I just want to be clear here, Josh. What you're telling me is there can be whole families of people who are qualified to be in movies. Just because of who they're related to. But to find somebody who can act and also sit in a wheelchair, that's beyond belief. That's that your position, Josh?
No. I'm not even going to entertain your joke because I don't want somebody to take
you say.
The Brick Pit, now presented to you by Fox News.
I don't want somebody to
Isn't that what you mean, Josh? Why do you hate America?
Because you're in it.
When exactly did you stop hitting your wife? That's
I don't want anybody to take the Fight Club wrong lesson out of what I'm saying. But yes, there is an attempt to fulfill those roles. And there's controversy among that too, because now that being gay is less stigmatized than it was 20, 30 years ago, there are people in the gay community that don't think straight people should play gay.
Yeah.
So like Tom Hanks playing
Wouldn't have been
gay
able to do
now,
that. Yeah.
maybe it's like, hey, you're taken away from gay actors. It's a sensitive thing, and I understand the being upset and wanting to be represented, but also the more specific you get, the harder it's going to be. And so do you find a Native American actress and that's still, I would imagine, not a huge pool,
right?
And then you're dialing it down more. So what's in service of, or what's going to be more beneficial to that community? A better representation, or having someone that actually has? So, and I don't know the answer. This is why I don't do casting. They wouldn't hire me anyway. So these are difficult conversations. But
if you did casting, everybody would be Wilford Brimley.
Yes. I think the positive takeaway from it, though, all of this is that there is an attempt,
an effort being made.
The effort is being made, and that there are systems in place to ask these questions and to make these determinations, and even when they're uncomfortable. Back in the 80s, gay representation was Lamar from Revenge of the Nerds, and it was not flattering.
Yeah, mannequin, whatever the character was,
Right. Very broad minstrelly, I would even say. And that's less the case now. I mean, there's still tropes that exist. The gay characters often find themselves being the first one murdered, or murdered to engender sympathy or show that there's danger. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the landscape is different, and there are efforts being made. So, to answer your question, I don't know.
Shut up.
I heard a lot of yes and in that sentence. That was good.
Well, he's been taking improv classes.
Yes, it's better than your usual just silence when I ask a question. So I'll give you props for that. The hard stare, which people can't see because we don't release the video of these, but
because it would destroy the world.
And people will see that popcorn kernel that's been hanging in your mustache for the past hour.
That's a tick.
I want to end up on a movie, and because it's me, I'm going to try and put a Western in there anytime I can. And this is the 1976 movie starring John Wayne called The Shootist.
The Western movie has become an American tradition. Films like Stagecoach, Red River, Shane, High Noon, and The Magnificent Seven will never be forgotten. Now, in a Hollywood studio and on location in Nevada, a new Western is being made, destined to be, perhaps, the greatest of them all. Dino De Laurentiis presents The Shootist, the story of John Bernard Brooks, the last of the great gunfighters, a living legend. The role is being played by an actor who is himself a living legend, John Wayne. Co-starring with Wayne is a group of Hollywood's finest actors: James Stewart, Richard Boone, Lauren Bacall, Ron Howard, Scatman Crothers, Harry Morgan, Rick Lenz, John Carradine, Sherry North, Hugh O'Brien. This film has the makings of a classic. In it, John Wayne gives the most remarkable performance of his career as he recreates the final days of the man they called the Shootist.
This is a movie that the chronological setting is 1901 in Carson City, Nevada. John Wayne plays an old gunslinger, former lawman and everything, who finds out that he has cancer and he's going to die. It's really about him coming to terms with that and how other people use him because he has a amount of fame because of his history as a lawman. How people who find out he's dying, how they try to use his death to their advantage in certain situations, and him really kind of taking control of his own life and his own end, because at that time there was no treatment for it. It was just you wait for a long, painful death. The only thing they could do is give him laudanum to ease the pain. It's a pretty well cast movie. And John Wayne used his oomph to get a lot of people casted. Jimmy Stewart's in it. And Stewart had actually retired from acting by this point because he was having trouble with his hearing. And there's even discussion about the scene with John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart took several takes because they kept messing up their lines.
Oh.
At the time, Don Siegel, who was directing it, was like, hey, we need to try and concentrate and get this, because they were doing like 20 takes, and John Wayne just jokingly says, well, you need better actors. But in reality, Wayne said Stewart knew all his lines. He just couldn't hear John Wayne's reading.
That's
to
wild.
get his cues.
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
And you have Lauren Bacall is in it as well. A lot of, John Forster was like
So
John
by
Carradine.
the mid-70s, they would have been on. I mean, I know they're all like A-list actors for their time, but they would have been on their kind of way down, right? By that point.
Yeah, they're kind of past their prime at
all
this
of
point.
them would have been, yeah.
Yeah. Richard Boone was in it as well,
Yeah.
who, he was well past his prime. He was, a lot of these people were pretty big Western stars, either on television or the big screen, if not both.
It plays into the narrative, though.
Right. Yeah.
Because it opens up by giving like the backstory of this character, and they do it by showing clips of older John Wayne movies.
Oh, interesting.
Starting with Red River, and I think Hondo, and then Rio Bravo, and
I really
El
wanted
Dorado.
to watch this before we recorded this. I'm sad I didn't now, because it sounds like a movie I'd like. So
It's a really good movie if you're well versed
if you've got
in
the
the cinematic
catalog.
history
Yeah.
of Westerns. It is definitely one of John Wayne's better performances. The movie overall by itself isn't a spectacular movie, but the fact that it is John Wayne, and it's like his last movie.
Yeah. It's his goodbye, basically. Yeah.
It's a swan song, yeah.
Yeah, despite the kind of the cult rumors around it, John Wayne was not sick with cancer at the time that he filmed this. He had first been diagnosed, I think, in the early 60s with lung cancer, but had surgeries. And he was clean by this point, but he did do like a PSA about cancer right after this. Like they used a scene from the movie when he was being told he has cancer. And then he's also, I actually got that actual news, 12 years ago or something like that. But then he went into remission, or not remission, but the cancer came back and
relapse.
Spread it. Yeah. And it spread all over his body a few years after this. So by 79 is when he passed away.
Wow.
From it. And I think that kind of imprints on a lot of people, that there's like that parallel between his character
and
himself, his own story. Yeah.
I was just reading the article on this, and it says that they used footage from this. He did a PSA for the American Cancer Society.
Oh, that thing I just said? Yes, they did that.
What was interesting about all of this is, do you remember that old urban legend about him being in the Nevada desert during the nuclear tests? And that was
yes, that it was the radiation from the nuclear testing, and not the fact that he had smoked for like 60
like 12
years.
packs a day or whatever it was. Yeah.
I think y'all are confusing that with the Crystal Skull.
I'm not confusing that with anything. Crystal Skull, I've never heard of it. What is that, Josh?
It's a vodka that Dan Aykroyd makes.
Oh, okay. That sounds delicious.
And it's just as deadly as the other thing we won't mention.
It's really not that great. Neat bottle.
Ron Howard.
Yeah.
Opie Taylor is in this. It's one of those points where he's transitioning from being Ron Howard, the actor, to Ron Howard, the director. He's still kind of in that era. But, I mean, yeah, he's sharing the screen with John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and Lauren Bacall.
Wow. Right?
I mean, that's, yeah.
In 1976, if you're growing up watching those movies and you're an actor, can you imagine? Like, that would just be, that'd be like, what, Anthony Hopkins and Harrison Ford and, I don't know, Denzel Washington today? Like, that would be.
Yeah.
And legend has it that John Wayne made fun of him, and he said, I'll show you all. I'll have more Oscars than all of you before. And then he gave John Wayne cancer.
He's like,
that's the Ron Howard secret power.
It's like an old witch on the sidelines of a circus. He goes, and now you've got cancer.
But the basic plot of it is like when Jimmy Stewart's doctor character tells Wayne's character that he has cancer, and he's telling him just how he's going to waste away. And, he gives him the laudanum, and he's like, isn't that, addictive. It's like, well, if you're careful with it, but
At
you're
this point,
going
what
to
does it
die.
matter? Right.
Yeah, you're going to die of extreme pain. And he tells him, it's like, a man with courage like you, if it was me, I wouldn't die that way.
Books, every few days I have to tell a man or a woman something I don't want to. I've been practicing medicine for 29 years and I still don't know how to do it well.
Why don't you just say it flat out?
All right? You have a cancer. Advanced. Is that what that fellow up at Creed told you?
Yeah.
You didn't believe him?
No.
You believe me?
Can't you cut it out, Doc?
I'd have to gut you like a fish.
Well, what can you do?
There's just very little I can do. When the pain gets too bad, I can give you something.
What you're trying to tell me is that Damn.
I'm sorry, Bogus.
You told me I was strong as an ox.
Well, even an ox dies.
How much time do I have?
2 months, 6 weeks, less. There's no way to tell.
Well, what'll I be able to do?
Well, anything you want first, and later on you won't want to.
How much later?
You'll know when. Now, you'll have to get off your feet and get some rest. Have you made any kind of arrangements for a room?
A lot of the movie is essentially about the end of one's life, like how everything comes back, because he's in a boarding house run by Lauren Bacall, and her son is Ron Howard. She doesn't like the idea that he's like this legendary gunfighter. Of course, Ron Howard is enamored with him when he finds that out. John Wayne's past kind of starts coming back to get him. Here's this famous gunfighter. And a couple of guys like try to shoot him through the window of his room and murder him in his sleep so that they can be the guys that killed this famous lawman. And, he gets them in the end. And they even ask us, "What do you know these guys?" I have no idea who they are. He's so famous that he doesn't even have to have a direct connection with them for them to come after him, just the fame of it.
This sets up a lot of tropes for Westerns that come after it.
Well, it's just a trope for Westerns that came before it, too.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like I said, it's not treading really any new ground in a lot of places. It's definitely the strength of the performances, but essentially he just comes to a realization, like he sends Ron Howard's character out to 3 different guys. One of them is one of the local men who, when he first gets into town, like tries to threaten him and wants to draw on him. Ron Howard talks him down out of it. Another guy is a man who John Wayne had killed his brothers years before, and he runs a ranch, and he's played by Richard Boone. And the third one is the local faro dealer, who's also somewhat of a gunman himself. John Wayne has Ron Howard go to them and tell them, I will be in the local bar at, like 10 a.m. on the 29th to, tell them to be there, but don't tell the other ones that you told anyone else. And so he goes out, and it turns out it's his birthday. It's like his 58th birthday. And he goes to the saloon there to have a final shootout with the 3 guys. There was an earlier scene where Ron Howard was talking to him about like all the guys he killed and what it takes to be a good gunfighter. He talks about Bat Masterson and all that kind of stuff. And John Wayne says, it's not being fast, it's not being accurate. You have to be willing to do it. You have to be willing to take a man's life. And most people aren't willing to do that. And the person you have to look out for the most is just some amateur with a gun that comes up behind you. At the end, he kills all 3 of the gunmen that are after him. And as he's walking the way, the bartender comes up with a shotgun and shoots him in the back. Ron Howard's character sees that, and he runs over and picks up John Wayne's gun and kills the bartender. And there's a great moment where Ron Howard like looks at the gun and John Wayne's looking at him, and you can see the disappointment on his face or the fear in his face. And then Ron Howard throws away the gun, and John Wayne, the last thing he does is he smiles and nods at him before he dies for not picking up the gun and becoming. It is about him choosing how he goes out, which I think is a big thing about illness that a lot of people, because
I can't imagine that you watch this movie without knowing that it's John Wayne's last movie and knowing that John Wayne dies.
Like in real life. That's always going to be imprinted on it. But another thing is, like I said, my own father had cancer, and he didn't tell anyone about it because his older sister, had died about 3 decades before from cancer. And he saw how all the treatments, what that did to her, the chemo and everything. And, my father is from an era that, much like John Wayne's character, I would rather face death as the person I am than to have a cure that wastes me away worse than the disease. And that kind of resonates more now with me, having watched the film again after my father had passed away than it did before. And I think that's one of the main messages of this film, is someone having their own agency over their life.
Choosing your way out rather than being subjected to the whims of the disease, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very good movie if you understand the people that are in it, not just John Wayne, but there are a lot of Western actors in it. He wasn't even the original choice. They gave it to like people like Paul Newman and George C. Scott and Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood. I think even Gene Hackman were all offered it, and they all passed on it. They didn't want to use Wayne because he apparently was found to be difficult to work with his previous film, Rooster Cogburn.
Rooster Cogburn, yeah.
Because of, all of his
notoriously bad-tempered in that movie, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
No, but I mean, he was getting older, and like I said, he had surgery in the 60s where they not only removed some ribs, but I think like his left lung had been removed as well because of the cancer. So he wasn't as capable in the 70s as he had been previously. It's Carson City, Nevada. It's a higher altitude too, so apparently he had a little trouble breathing.
Oh, interesting.
As well. I think they had to shut down for a week because he got like influenza or something, but other than that, everything apparently went very, very well. If you like Westerns and you understand the legend that is John Wayne when it comes to those films, I think it is kind of a moving film. And if you've ever had anybody who suffered from cancer, I think it's an impactful in that regard as well. Adam, why don't you write everybody a prescription to get out of this?
So if folks have any need to reach out to us for reasons unknown, the best way to do that is to check us out on social media by looking for The Bricked Pit. Otherwise, if they want to find us, they can do that by going to anchor.fm/Bricked Pit, where they can leave us a voicemail, or you can send us an email at brickpit@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening.